Motion lets you trigger animation based on scroll. We're talking about scroll-triggered animation, not to be confused with scroll-linked animations. Here, scrolling past a certain point will trigger the animation. You can think of it as a motion sensor, and as you walk, you reach a certain point and the sensor triggers, and this is where the animation starts. That's very different to scroll-linked animations, where the progress of the scroll is tied and connected and synced with the progress of the animation, sort of like if you have a timeline that you can scrub back and forth. With that out of the way, let's take a look at scroll-triggered animations. For this example, we need a bit of room to scroll, and therefore it looks like there is nothing on screen. But if I start scrolling, we have these 4 basically cards that you can see up here. So first thing first, let's turn this div in a motion.div. I need to import motion from motion react. And so if we wanted to add animations to our boxes, you'd think we could have initial styles to begin with. So opacity 0, and let's go scale 0.5. And then you might think that you want to animate this into opacity 1 and scale 1. But if I start scrolling, you can see that the cards are already animated. Now, if I don't change the scroll position and refresh the page, you can see that actually all the cards are animating. They are just animating as soon as the page loads because the animate property kicks in. What we want really here is that when nothing shows in the viewport, nothing animates, and when the card enters the viewport, like here, this is when we want to trigger the animation. You might remember that the motion component has helpful properties like while tap when someone is tapping, while hover, while focus, and well, there is a nifty little one that we can use here called whileInView. So check this out. I'm going to replace animate with whileInView. All right, let's go back to the top. I'm going to refresh the page and I can wait as long as I want. And when I start scrolling is when the animation happens. That is pretty nice. Now, if I scroll back up, you will see that the animation happens both ways. Essentially, the elements will, while in view, be animated. Here, while in view, we have these values, and then we go back to initial. So sometimes this might be what you want, but for the majority of time, you don't want to overwhelm your visitors with too much animation. Let me prove my point real quick, and I will have a transition with an obnoxious spring that goes for very long. And I will start scrolling, and you tell me how you feel about these animations after seeing them for the first time. You get the point. Less is more with animations, and often what you'll want to do is only do the enter animation once and then never animate anymore. And there is a great solution for that. I'll just remove the spring here, and we will add a new property called Viewport. So the viewport is essentially a set of options that's going to help fine-tune the triggering of the animation, something like how much of the element should be in view before the trigger happens, or how much of the viewport itself should the shape be in, and also the ability to only run the animation once. So let's start with that. The first option we're going to pass is once set to true. And with that in place, the animation will still trigger, but they will only ever trigger once per element. So now when I go back up and back down, it's not animating again, which is, once again, probably the most sensible way. If you're building a landing page with some fancy elements animating in, usually you just want to do it once, bring a bit of delight, but not overwhelmed by repeating the same animation every time the user goes up and down. So another thing we can look at is the viewport options for when an animation should trigger. And actually, I will remove once here, so it's going to help us see the animation multiple times. So actually, let me quickly change the type of properties we animate to make it a little bit easier to see what's happening. So I'm going to animate the width property, and we'll go from 50% to 100%. Remember, motion is going to use scale transforms instead of width here to be performant, so don't worry about this. And I think that'll make it a little bit easier to understand when the animation triggers. So as I scroll, focus on the next box. As soon as it enters the viewport, is when the width goes from 50% to 100%. And same going up, when the shape has completely left is when this gets triggered. But what if I want something else? What if I want half the shape or maybe the full shape to be in view before the animation gets triggered? Well, you can do that. This is another viewport property and it's called amount. So the amount is a value between 0 and 1, 1 being the entire shape has to be in the viewport. And you can see already that this shape is not fully in the viewport, it started leaving, and so the animation has already triggered. And it will reanimate in to have the whileInView condition of 100% width when it's fully inside the viewport. So this is the trigger now entering and leaving. The requirement is to be fully in view. And you can see that it's working really well. And if I was changing this to 0.5, you can guess what's going to happen. The shape is going to animate when half of it, somewhere around here, is in the viewport. So you can see the trigger is halfway through the shape. So that's pretty useful. And then you can combine this with the viewport specific spacing or margin as well. So let's go back to amount of 1 when the shape is entirely in the viewport. And I'm going to pair this with margin. If you wanted to have some buffer, you can have some negative. Let's go negative 100 pixels here. So now the shape should remain at 50% width, even though it's fully in the viewport with amount 1, because we have another 100 pixels to go before it kicks in. And so now we have this little buffer calculated at the bottom and the top of the viewport of 100 pixels. Pretty cool, right? Between the amount and margin viewport options, you have a lot of control as to when to trigger your animations. And by the way, you can do a lot more programmatically. So let's say that we had some text inside these boxes and we wanted to change the value of the text when the element is in view. Okay, so to demo this, I will simplify the code a little bit. Instead of having 4 cards, I will just have 1 card that is purple and has a bit of text inside of it. So if I scroll down, you can see we have that 1 card that animates to 100% width while in the viewport. And now we're going to use the useInView hook. So let's import it from Motion. And basically, we're going to use it to change the text inside the box when it's in view. So we can do the check, const isInView, and use the useInView hook. But as you will see, the useInView hook expects a ref, which is a reference to the element that should be determined in view. So I'm also going to import useRef from React so that we can create a ref. Const ref equals useRef, and then we can pass that ref to useInView. So I need to assign this ref to our box, which is this element. So here, ref equals ref. And so I should now have this isInView dynamic value that is going to be true or false based on the status of the box. So, well, let's try this. I will go down where we have box here. And maybe instead of box, we can have the isInView check. And if it is, this is a bit boring. Let's go hi, bye. So a good start, it says hi while it's in the viewport. Let's see what happens when we exit. You can see that it still says hi all the way. So what's wrong? Well, notice how the viewport here has an amount of 1, which means that the whole box should be inside the viewport for the animation to trigger. Well, the useInView hook also have a series of options that you can pass. And this is where our now familiar amount property is available. So if I set the amount to 1 here, we should now be in the same situation where when the element is not fully in view, the useInView hook is going to deem that it's not in view as well. So let's try to scroll out of there. Aha! Now it's working. And at the bottom as well. So the useInView hook is very powerful when you want to do more than just animate an element and you want to have some logic that changes based on the fact that is it in view or not. Yeah, pretty useful stuff. Now, if you needed more information than just is InView or not, say if you wanted to know the scroll progress, is it 80% from the top, 12% from the top? This is where you tap into scroll linked animation, and we'll talk about that in a different video.